Hello, welcome friends. In this module, we'll be talking about JDBC. At the end of this module, actually this topic being large, we are covering in 2 modules. So the first part of the module will be talking more about how do we achieve connection to a database. One thing here I would like to mention is this module assumes that you have knowledge about databases and executing SQL queries. Okay, what we are going to be talking here is about from a Java application, how does one make a connection to a database and interact with the database. So in this the first module will be looking at some of the part which is related to first part is about making connection to the database, and then preparing for executing the SQL statements. Okay, SQL statements, yes, we'll be covering some of the how to execute the DDL kind of things, but when we execute statement like the select statement from Java, the results of the query will be available in some kind of structures, and how do we go about using those data structures, and that will be covering in the next module. So let's begin by looking at what is JDBC. So yeah, what is JDBC? So JDBC, it's Java Database Connectivity. Oh, somewhere it says, if you look at the Oracle sites, somewhere it says yes, JDBC is Java Database Connectivity, and someplace, oh, they're saying JDBC is just JDBC. It's not an acronym. So let's not bother about whether it's an acronym or not. Let's proceed and let's look at what is available from JDBC. But before we try to understand JDBC, let's look at the need and some predecessor to JDBC also. So a similar technology, some similar things here. So before going to what is JDBC, what is ODBC? ODBC stands for Open Database Connectivity. But what is it basically? What is it for? Why did we have ODBC initially in the first place? Yes, in the old days, we do have lot of database vendors, and each of those database vendors were providing some libraries of their own, by which application in those days mostly used to be written in C language. So application written in C language could make a connection to their database and be able to execute SQL over their database. Interaction with the database was possible from a C application. So they used to provide, each one was having his own library. Now the problem which was arising because of that was that each vendor has his own library. Now if I develop an application in C in those days, and maybe I developed the application to talk to the Oracle database, but then someone has Sybase, so what do I do there? So in that case, do I rewrite the whole code? Yes, that's what used to happen because Sybase library was different. So yes, they still have that old libraries, separate libraries of their own. They have their, what we call them as native drivers. But then JDBC was developed as a standard. So it's like a standard. What is JDBC? It's nothing, it's ODBC I'm talking about. So what is ODBC? ODBC is a standard for connecting to a database from a C language. So ODBC is nothing but a set of functions, a standard set of functions which enable a C application to connect and interact with a database. Fine. It was required as a standard so that we write our application only once, and we should be able to easily switch from one application to another application. What was being done in this case was, yes, ODBC was defined as a set of functions. It's a standard set of functions. But then, of course, what you would have is, you would have different implementations for the standard set of functions. That is what we call as ODBC driver. So we would have a separate ODBC driver, a driver which was an implementation of that ODBC functions for Oracle would be separate from another driver which was a ODBC driver for Sybase. You will have a ODBC driver for SQL Server, for MySQL, for lots of different types of databases. So for each type of databases there would be a separate ODBC driver, and the functions were same, fine, functions used were same. So if someone had to switch from one application, someone had an application and he wanted to switch from one using a particular kind of database to another database, it would not be a problem because of the use of standard. So if you write an application which uses the standard things, you don't have a problem switching to a different database. That means you use only ODBC calls, don't use the native calls. Fine. So that's one thing. So that's a predecessor to ODBC. Now what we have here is, we are talking about JDBC now. So let's see, what is JDBC? Yes, the JDBC is again a standard. It's a standard set of interfaces and classes which are defined as part of java.sql package. So we got a java.sql package defining our standard for the JDBC. It's mainly full of interfaces. Interfaces which would have a different implementation for different kind of databases. Fine, like the same idea as what was there for ODBC. ODBC had different drivers, right? Same way here also we got different JDBC driver. So when we talk of a JDBC driver, what is a JDBC driver? It's an implementation of these java.sql package, whatever interfaces are there. Most of those interfaces, they would have to be implemented differently for each kind of database. So if it's Oracle, we have one implementation of all those java.sql package, fine. And if it's a Sybase, it will be different. If it's MySQL, there's a different. So we again here also have different kind of JDBC drivers. Okay. Now initially when Java was there, we came up with initial versions of Java when they were created. Yes, we didn't have JDBC support from all the database vendors. Fine. Availability of JDBC driver would also be a problem. So yes, it was with Sun Microsystems at that time. So Sun Microsystems in those days started including as part of the JDK itself an implementation of a JDBC driver, which would be an implementation of the JDBC. So there was a JDBC driver which could always connect to an ODBC. Availability of ODBC driver was very good, and so yes, if someone wanted to develop some application, start using them, and if he wanted to use wanted to connect to a database from the Java application, he should be able to make use of the JDBC API, which is a java.sql package only, and be able to connect to any kind of databases, where if JDBC driver is not available, but if ODBC driver is available, he should still be able to work. So for that, the Sun Microsystems JDK, they always used to include a driver for the ODBC, which we call as the JDBC-ODBC bridge driver. Again, if you look at how that JDBC-ODBC bridge driver works, fine, that JDBC-ODBC bridge driver is going to be connecting is normally, because in this case it has this JDBC-ODBC bridge driver has to talk to the ODBC driver, fine, and that is going to involve invocation in C language. That means the implementation which is returned for the JDBC-ODBC bridge driver is a native implementation. Oh, another point, it's a native as well as it's an indirect. It's not directly talking to a database. It's an indirect connection to the database and not a direct connection to the database. So here, there can be different ways of implementing JDBC drivers. So we have JDBC drivers being categorized into 4 types. JDBC drivers have been categorized into 4 types. the two criteria which are used are for categorizing them. Whether this driver directly talks to the database or is it indirect. And second criteria was, does it require some native API or is it pure Java? So based on this, there were 4 types of drivers. So we got 4 types of drivers. Type 1 is where we have this driver being uses native, as well as it is indirect. If it is indirect and using native, it is a type 1 driver. If it is the JDBC-ODBC falls in that category, which is the type 1 driver. Type 2 driver, it's going to be direct but uses native. Fine. If it uses native, it is type 1 or type 2. Direct is type 2, indirect is type 1. Same way, if it is pure Java, fine, does not use any native, and if it is indirect, type 3. If it is direct, we have type 4. Fine. So that way we got 4 types of JDBC drivers: type 1, type 2, type 3 and type 4. Fine, depending on how the implementation comes. Okay, because yes, there are implications of whether the driver uses, if there is something which uses native methods, then there is dependency, making it available for all platforms. Fine, there's a lot of dependency and other issues will come. Security issues also arise, and therefore, fine, those things are of concern. Fine, and therefore, yes, preferred driver would be the type 4 driver, pure Java, direct connection. Fine, okay, fine. So that's about the types of drivers. Fine, the 4 types of drivers we have. Okay, next thing, let's start by looking at exploring what is this java.sql package containing. Again, so our aim here is to be able to connect to a database and then start interaction with the database. So let's see what is there available in the java.sql package for us. Again, when we develop any application, there will be some part which will be dependent on the driver which you use. Okay, but those kind of things can be pushed into the configuration part. So if we change a JDBC driver, we simply have to make some change in the configuration files, and then things should start working. We'll mention and we'll see what are those kind of things. There are just a couple of things where you will be dependent on which JDBC driver you are using. Fine, we'll be mentioning all those things as we go along. Fine. So first thing, first part, let's divide it into 2 parts. That is, first part should be about how do we make a connection with the database, and then having made a connection, how do we start interaction. Interaction will be in the form of executing SQL or stored procedures and such things. So first thing, starting to make a connection in the database. So in java.sql package, what is available for us to make a connection? One thing we know, each driver, fine, when I say JDBC driver, yes, each JDBC driver will be a implementation of what is the various interfaces in the java.sql package. So yeah, fine. So let's talk about how to make a connection with the database. So for this, yes, as part of the java.sql package, what we have is we have an interface called driver. We want, the first aim will be to make a connection. Now connection here is represented by by the interface called connection. So in java.sql package, we got an interface called connection. So our aim is to obtain a connection, and to obtain a connection, we have another interface called driver, which contains method to get us a connection object. So it's a driver. Driver is another interface, fine, which will give us the connection object. Now the driver interface it's available as interface in the java.sql package. Now this interface would be implemented differently by different JDBC drivers. The driver is an implementation. So if you have a particular JDBC driver, what you need to know before you start to make a connection is you need to know which class in that particular driver, JDBC driver, is the implementation of the driver interface. Fine. The driver is as an interface is one thing, but JDBC driver, when I say JDBC driver, it's a whole bundle, the bundle of the implementation. It would be normally be in the form of a jar file which would be available to you. So a driver, first thing is about getting the connection. We need a driver. So now first step, how do you get your driver? How you will need to create an object of the driver. How do you create an object of the driver? One thing could be someone says, okay, let me just say new and use the name of the class which is for the driver implementation. But then you are making your code dependent on the driver totally, because if you change the driver, the implementation class is different and you'll have to rewrite the code. At least recompilation would be needed. Even that one line of code change requires recompilation and everything. So no, we don't want to do that. If I have to create a new object, how do I create a new object? Only by new? Or is there some other way of creating? Is there some way by which if I just get as a parameter the name of a class as a string, can I create a new object? Let's see. Yes, we do have some option there. We got a class called class in the java.lang package, which has a method called new instance, which can create an instance for me. Class object is to be created first for whatever is the class. So that means I need to be loading a class, get a class object created. How do I load a class? Again, for that we got a static method in the class. So our class called class has a static method called forName. It can take a string as parameter and return the class object for that class. Okay. So having got this class object, then we can always use the new instance method and then get the driver object created. Okay, you might be writing an application where you need to use various kinds of drivers, maybe because one application may be connecting to different types of databases. Fine, you could always have your application connect to 2-3 different databases at the same time, and therefore you will somehow need to be managing all these objects of driver. We got something ready for us here. We got something in the java.sql package which can help us to manage our driver objects. We got a class called DriverManager. So java.sql package has a class called DriverManager, which has methods like registering a driver, having created a driver object to be able to register a driver or unregister a driver, and if whatever are the registered drivers, how do I make use of a driver to get a connection for me? So we got all kinds of methods in the DriverManager class. And this DriverManager class, no, you don't have to create any object of that class. This has only static methods. So let's see how do we proceed with the steps here. So first step, normally, since we would not like to hardcode the creation of the object of driver, we would like to use it as a string. We don't want to use new, okay, to create the object. Fine. So what we can do here is, first step would be to be able to load the driver implementation class. That means we'll say class.forName, and as a parameter we should be passing the name of the class which we have read from some configuration. If you hardcode here, again that would require changing. So don't hardcode. It's not advised that when you say class.forName, you don't put in double quotes the name of the class. That means, because with that it would mean that if you want to change the JDBC driver, you need to recompile your code. No, we are not interested in that. So your things normally should be to read that from a configuration file, what is the name of the class, and use it here. Okay, so that was one part where we are dependent on which JDBC driver you are using. We need to be knowing the name of the class. Now one thing, what happens when we say class.forName? When we load any class, we know the static block would be executed. Fine, that whatever is the static block of that class, that would be executed. So as part of the all these driver implementations, what they have been following, all of them have followed, is whenever someone loads that class in the static block, they do the job of creating the object of that driver class and registering with the driver manager. Fine. So we just simply we use only one step. We don't even create the object of the driver and the registering with the driver manager. That can be done just because you load the class. This would happen because the driver implementations do this for us. So yes, step one for any Java application which is interested in making use or making connection with the database, the first step should be class.forName and parameter, the name of the driver class, driver implementation class, which is known from whichever JDBC driver you are using. So this one, yes, one thing you need to remember here is when we say class.forName, whatever class name you are passing, if it is not loadable, maybe you have not kept your driver, JDBC driver in your class path, it's not available for some reason, if it can't be loaded, it throws a class not found exception. So you either put it in a try catch or have a throws, whatever way you are managing. So just remember to take care of that. Class not found exception is what is thrown from forName method, the static method of the class. So class.forName and name of the driver class, that should be the step one. Once the driver is registered with the driver manager, then getting an object of connection is simple. We have this method, static method in the driver manager class. We have this method called getConnection, which takes as parameter a string which is a JDBC URL, and it has two more parameters. It has parameter for the login name and the password required for authentication with the database. So it's a database login ID. For example, when you use Oracle, fine, we use very commonly, we have that login ID of Scott and password of Tiger. Fine. So it's that kind of thing, that's the username and password. But before that, we need to also pass a URL. Now this URL again is something which should come from the configuration. It is something which is going to be part of the configuration, because this is also dependent on which JDBC driver you are using. The URL are different. Different kinds of URLs would be understood by different JDBC drivers. But something common about all these URLs would start with JDBC : the protocol, main protocol is going to be JDBC : there would be a sub protocol which would be dependent on what JDBC driver you are using. Or you are using a JDBC driver for MySQL, or in that case it will be JDBC : MySQL : / and host name : the port number / the database. Oh, so it's not a very generalized thing. This is specific to MySQL driver. You could have a different driver and this URL string would be different. Fine. So this is the second part, which is going to be dependent on which driver you are using, the URL string for making a connection to the database. Fine. So this is one URL string which will be managed as a configuration and not hard code within your application. Fine. It's not advised that way. And of course, so getConnection method, what does it return? The getConnection method returns as the connection object. So step one, our first aim was to be able to make a connection with the database. So making connection with the database done using two steps. Step one is class.forName, just load the driver class. Second step is to use the getConnection static method called getConnection, and you get the object of connection. This is your connection to a database. Now, having obtained the connection to a database, now you would be interested in interaction with the database. So let's look at the second part, which is about interaction with the database. So interaction with the database, let's see what kind of interactions we'll have with the database. It's mainly about, so there are three common things which we do with the database from using JDBC. One thing is, you would be interested in executing some kind of an SQL, or you might be interested in using a precompiled SQL, or you might be interested in executing stored procedure or a function. So for all these three different things, we got three different types of objects to be created. We have three different interfaces to represent three kinds of requirements which we have. We have an interface called statement, which could be used for executing any kind of SQL. If you have got a precompiled SQL, then we got an interface called prepared statement, which can be used for executing any kind of a precompiled SQL. And third interface which is useful here is the interface called callable statement, which can be used for executing any kind of stored procedure or a function. Fine. So let's explore each of these one by one. So first let's look at the statement. Fine. As far as statement is concerned, how do we obtain a statement? Oh, all these three can be obtained from the connection. We got a connection fine with the get connection method in our steps for making a connection. So from the use this connection object in the connection interface, we got this method called create statement, which does not require a parameter, and it simply returns us an object of statement. And once you have the statement object, we'll see how do we execute any kind of SQL. Fine. Or another part, second will be how do we obtain a prepared statement. So in the connection interface, we got this method called prepare statement. Fine. Prepare statement. But yes, prepare statement is what? A precompiled SQL. It's a fixed SQL. It's an SQL which is going to be fixed, and it's always going to remain the same. Once you have a prepared statement object, it would be only executing a particular SQL only. Of course, you can execute as many number of times as you like, but if one prepared statement is only executing a particular SQL only, any number of times, that's fine. But if you use a statement, you can use it for different SQLs. Okay, so in order to obtain prepared statement, we have this method prepare statement. Parameter to this has a parameter here. The parameter to this is nothing but a string, which is your SQL string. Okay, one thing here, as part of the SQL string, you can always use parameters wherever values are needed. Fine. So for example, if you say, oh, I want to select star from a table called account, where account number is so and so. So account number equal to, oh, I don't need to hard code that. I would like to use a different account number each time with this SQL. So I can say account number equal to question mark. That question mark here, find that symbol as part of that string. That question mark is nothing but a parameter for this prepared statement. So we have our precompiled SQL, which can contain some parameters here. Question marks for instead of hard coding some values. That's what can be done. Fine. While creating a prepared statement. So obtaining statement, obtaining prepared statement, and obtaining a, let's see, how do we obtain a callable statement? Okay, callable statement, the method in connection interface is a method called prepare call, and the method name is prepare call. Parameter is the call statement. The call statement should be specified inside, it's a string where we have braces. The string contains starting and ending braces. Within braces it says, okay, oh, now here the sub-dependent part, oh, whether you are calling a function or a stored procedure. Oh, what's the difference between function and procedure? A function has a return value, procedure no return value. So something which you want to execute, if it has a return value, then yes, you should start with that the string which would look like braces, and within braces you'll have question mark for representing a parameter, some return value, equal to call the name of the function, and in bracket for the various parameters which you would like to be passing to that function, you would put those question marks to represent the parameters which can always be set on the callable statement before it is executed. So we'll have even callable statement containing various parameters. We embed those question marks in place of where we want to keep parameters. Number of question marks within your string is the number of parameters for your prepared statement and callable statement. So prepared statement and callable statement, they both contain parameters. Okay, in case it's a call, if you want to use a stored procedure where there's no return type, okay, your string would be simple, braces, there's no question mark equal to in front, straight away write call your procedure name, and in bracket the parameters represented by question marks. Right. So that's how you create the objects of statement, prepared statement, and callable statement. Okay, fine. Fine, we would like to be able to execute some kind of SQL. That's fine. But one more thing before we go away, let's look at some other things which are necessary and which can be done using the connection interface. Okay, connection interface, fine. In databases, another aspect we know about databases is we would like to have transactions. Oh, what do we mean by transaction? Fine, we manage transactions, right? In database, what is a transaction? Or transaction is giving us something like atomicity, or either all that thing is done or entire thing is not to be done. Fine. So for which we know, as far as SQL is concerned, fine, we use those commands like commit and rollback. Oh, a similar functionality available to us using the connection interface. So in the connection interface also we got such things here. So for example, okay, one more point here before we look into those commit rollback kind of things. There has to be, what normally happens is it might be dependent on what database you are using, but many times the databases by default would give us a auto commit. Auto commit means any statement you execute, it is getting committed. Fine. You execute a statement, it's automatically committed. So that means you can't be creating a transaction having multiple statements. So if you want to have a transaction having multiple statements, you need to set your auto commit to, you need to off your auto commit setting. Okay, so as far as similar thing here is concerned in JDBC, we got our connection interface providing us with a method called set auto commit. There's a get auto commit returning boolean value and a set auto commit where we pass a boolean value true or false. So if you want to have transactions for our within our application, we want to have some transaction where we would like to be executing a set of statements and then either commit or roll back the entire thing. You should first ensure that you set your auto commit to false. Fine. Once, so that's one thing which is like you have control over settings for the auto commit, which you can do from your Java application. Fine. So you have your, fine, this is one set auto commit which is related to transaction. Another thing, once I have the transaction, fine, once I have said set auto commit, now my transaction starts as soon as I start executing some kind of DML, insert, update, delete. Those are the things which are responsible, which are going to be part of my transaction. Okay, so as I fine, we might be using those statement, prepared statement, callable statements in order to execute our DML. Fine. Once some DML has been executed, then then you might say, okay, now you might conclude that okay, the entire thing, whatever I have done at this point, that needs to be either committed. If you want it to be committed, yes, you need to use the object of connection again. In connection, we have this method called commit. So that would commit and finish the transaction. So we got a method called commit in the connection interface. So committing a transaction, that can be done. Okay, if you want, you can do a rollback. Fine. So we got a method called rollback also in the connection. Sometimes you are interested in a partial rollback. What do we do for that? To have a partial rollback, what do we do? What do we use? We use, fine. So if you want to have a partial rollback, what do? We normally keep on creating save points. Fine. We execute some DML and then have a save point created. Fine. So similarly here also, what we got here in java.sql package, the connection interface provides us with a method called save point. We have this method called get save point, which would return an object of save point. The save point object which is returned here can then be managed for, can then be used in your rollback method. So when you want to roll back, you can also roll back to a particular save point which was created earlier. Fine. So save points are created with the get save point method on the connection, and then we have the rollback method with the, so we can do a partial rollback as well from your Java from a Java application. Fine. So that's how the rollback can be done. Fine. Okay. So fine. This is all related to the transactions. Fine. So related to transaction, we also saw about the methods like get and set for auto commit. We have the method called commit. We have the method called rollback. Fine. We have the method rollback, which can take a save point as a parameter, and to get a save point we have the method called get save point. And these are all in the connection interface. Fine. Now let's proceed further and let's look at how do we actually start executing some kind of a SQL. So if you want to execute any kind of SQL, fine, we can use this in the interface called statement. Fine. Statement obtained using the create statement method on the connection interface. Fine. So once you have a statement object, we can use it to execute any kind of SQL. Now for executing any SQL, we got three methods. Fine. There are three, the number of methods, but yes, there are three commonly used methods. All three methods capable of executing any kind of SQL. Only difference between them is the return type. We have a method, simple method called execute. It takes parameter as a string, the SQL you would like to execute. It would be able to execute any kind of SQL, but it would return a Boolean value, true or false, whether it was successful or not. Fine. Another one is we have execute update method, which would also be capable of taking any kind of any SQL. It would execute any SQL you have, but it normally returns an integer which represents the number of bytes, the number of rows affected by the SQL. And then we have the third method called execute query. Fine, capable of executing any kind of SQL, but it is in turn returning an object of result set. One thing remember, all three can be given any kind of SQL, but each one is designed for a specific type of SQL. The return type is different just for that reason. Fine. Okay. The first method is more suitable for the DDL kind of things. If you have create and drop, those kind of things, statements, yes, those whether they worked, executed successfully or not, so that's where it returns a Boolean value. Fine. You may ask it to execute a select, but then you don't get the results because the results would be given only through the result set object. Fine. Same way, you have the execute update method, which is more appropriate for a DML, insert, update, or a delete kind of a statement. How many rows were inserted, updated, or deleted? That's what the return value here, integer return value here is representing. Fine. So it's like execute update for DML is appropriate for DML. And if we want to execute some kind of a select statement, use the results of a select query, find and use them in your Java application somewhere, or what are the things in my table, fine, getting all those things. Oh, you should be using the execute query method, where we pass a select query as a parameter, and it would return us a result set object. Yes, the result set object contains the result of a select query. Any query is it's more like a cursor, fine, which contains the result of a execution of a select query. Fine. Okay, so now over and above this, the statement also has a method. You might be interested not in executing one statement, you might be interested in executing statements in a batch, a whole batch of statements to be executed in one go. So for that also we got a method here called execute batch. But before that, what all statements will the execute batch be executing? So for that, yes, we got two methods which are useful for building up a batch of statements in my statement, a batch of SQL statements. So your statement can be populated with a batch of SQL statements. For that, we got a method called add batch. Add batch takes one statement at a time. So you could just keep on using the add batch method, and sometimes if you have made some mistake and you are not interested, you can drop the whole batch by saying clear batch. So you got two methods, clear batch and start populating it again. And then once you have finished populating, you can always execute all of them as a single batch by using the execute batch method. The execute batch method would in turn be returning an array of integer. Fine. As the size of the array is same as the number of statements you had in the batch, and the return value, fine, of each represents a different status for execution of each of those SQL statements. So fine. So this is one part, and then so executing any kind of fine, executing statement can be used for executing a execute for executing a DDL, execute update for executing DMLs, and execute query for executing a select query. Fine. Select query, yes, it's a result set which is returned. Okay, fine. So fine. How do we analyze the result query? First two are simple. It's the result set which we are getting, and then how do we go through and analyze the result set, use the content of the result set in a Java application? For all that, we'll look at in the next module, fine, which is a continuation of this. Fine. So it's a continuation. In the next module, we'll be continuing with the. So in the next module, we'll be looking at the second part of JDBC, where we'll be looking at analyzing the result set using parameters in the prepared statement, the callable statement, and wrap up the whole of the JDBC part. Fine.